Welcome to the EntrePastor's podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EntrePastor's podcast on YouTube. Hey, my name is Jon Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and you're getting ready to listen to episode number 49, and we're titling this episode Snowflake Pastors. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. In today's culture, we use that term snowflake to refer to someone who is very delicate and easily offended. And that's not what we mean in this sense when we talk about snowflake pastors. Instead, you're going to hear in the conversation that I had with my other co-host, Les Hughes, you're going to hear us stumble across this idea that just like there are no two snowflakes that are identical, that our Creator makes them all very individually unique, the same is even true of us, maybe more so true of us as His created people and as pastors, as leaders in His church. So often we try to fit into these cookie cutter molds where we look just like someone else and we live out someone else's story. And as we continue to unpack our new pastor's roadmap to financial freedom, today we're going to be talking about the value of an assessment, like really looking inward at how God has uniquely shaped and wired me, that I'm like a snowflake, that there's no one else exactly like me, and therefore there's some things that are very unique about who God created me to be. And we're going to encourage you to take some assessments, and as we help you discover this roadmap to your own financial freedom, what if your pathway to that looked very different than anyone else's? And what if that was a good thing? What if that is okay? We believe it is. And so that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this week's episode. So without any further ado, thank you for tuning in, and let's check out this interview that I did recently, or the conversation rather, that I had with my friend and co-host Les Hughes, episode 49, Snowflake Pastors. Check this out. Well, hey man, I got a question for you, Les, as we get started here on episode number 49. When did you really start to discover like who you were and how God created you? I know like it's not just something that you get overnight. It's kind of a process, but how old do you think you were? Where were you in your life's journey when you really started to come into an understanding of who am I and why am I here?
I was a high school student, probably about a sophomore, junior year, and got really plugged into a great system, actually, in the local church where my family and I attended. And one man in particular began to mentor me. He was our student pastor at the time. He's still a real close friend. And I think he just saw some things in me that the Lord had placed there and encouraged me along the way. And then some doors opened up, and I didn't fully get that more until I was probably in my early 20s, maybe just, 22, 23, something like that. But it probably started back then. How about you?
Yeah, mine definitely was a process, and I would point back to some of my early teenage years as well. And also something I share with your story is that a lot of my journey started with other people recognizing things about me. I think sometimes we start to discover some of how God has wired us when other people speak things into our life. Now, we do need to be careful with that, because sometimes people will label us or speak something over us that is not true. But I'm talking about people who loved me, who meant well for me, who cared about me, and who recognized different things, maybe gifts in my life, or maybe some raw talents that God had maybe put inside of me that I didn't really know were there. I didn't see myself in that light yet, but they started to kind of call certain things out of me. But if I fast forward in my story a little bit, honestly, a lot of it was in my early years of pastoral ministry, as I started to really preach God's word on a regular basis and start to become a voracious reader, not only of scripture, but just of other books that were helping me grow and develop as a leader. I started down a road of really self-discovery, like assessing who I am and how God has wired me. And it's been so helpful for me. And that's really what we want to talk about in this episode here. You and I have recently released a pastor's roadmap to financial freedom. It's kind of the version 2.0 of our membership community, where we've revamped the curriculum, the coursework, and we're really excited about it. One of the entire modules in that course is called assessment, and it's given to helping a pastor who desires to get financially free, and specifically going down the road of entrepreneurialism, to go through a process of assessing who they are and how God has created them and wired them. And we want to just spend a little time in this episode talking about, why did we give an entire module to that topic? Les, what comes to your mind when you think of that? Like, why is this such an important thing for pastors to spend some time on before they just race forward with doing something?
Yeah, well, it's a critical piece, and most pastors, or most of the people that are listening to our to the podcast, in addition to even being pastors, know what it starts to seem like when God's just speaking to you. When His Holy Spirit begins to stir around in your heart, and He can speak to us in different ways, right? It can be simply through His Word. It could be a stirring of His Spirit within us. All those are biblical. It could even be the counsel of trusted friends. I had a pastor friend tell me once, God uses the human instrument. He always has, and He always will. And like you said and called it out, there needs to be some caution. Matter of fact, John, going back to that, do you mean that you can't always believe the person that comes and says to you, God gave me a word for you?
No,
Is that what you're saying to me, John?
That's
You can't always
exactly
trust
what I'm
that.
saying. Those people usually make me nervous more than anything
They
else.
do.
I've had a few where I really do believe God sent them, and most of the time,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they're hearing from a different Lord much of the time.
Yeah, if you've been a believer a while, and especially if you've been in leadership, you've had somebody do that. And I always want to say, no kidding. Well, I was just talking to him this morning, and he had a real good chance to tell me that, and he didn't say that to me at all.
Yeah.
Haven't you found though that we're going to share some tools in a moment? By the way, I don't think there's any question. This is the best work we've done so far,
Yeah.
and I'm thankful for all of the things that we've been able to put out there, and the things that people have shared with us as well. But there's no question that this is the best work. This is the best content, the most clear path that we've shared, and we're just going to keep making it better and better. So one of the things, even though I was saying that in jest, the truth is that when those people do come, and I've had them speak helpful things into my life, haven't you found that usually it's more of an affirmation of what God's doing in there already? And there's really nothing like, there's no lightning bolt out of the sky from someone else. It's usually just affirming some things that we've sensed, but for whatever reason, we haven't followed through with it. And one of the reasons I like this module and what's in it is it really is a practical step-by-step way to help people tune in to the way that God's wired us already, the way He's leading us already, but to also discover some new things and even what to do as a result of that. Because whatever journey we're on, John, I mean, there are going to be days that the journey gets hard.
Yeah.
It gets difficult. And it's the people who persevere and persist, sometimes just that desire or that determination to persist, that diligence to persist is the difference between success and not succeeding in the endeavor. And so we're going to get down into some details, but there are some things to have in place that make it, as we persist through, make success more doable and more realistic.
Yeah. I'm going to answer this question here in a moment of, the simple answer to why is self-assessment so important, but I'm going to back up and just share a quick little story, if I can, Les, from my upbringing in the church and in church world. And I think a lot of pastors can probably resonate with this. When I was a kid growing up in church, I would often think that, if I came forward, after a service, when there's been that heavy altar call of, giving your life to the Lord, that whatever it was that I feared the most, or the thing that would have made me the most miserable in life, if I gave my life to the Lord and surrendered fully to Him, that He would actually ask me to go do that very thing. So, if you don't want to live on the, plains of Africa and live in a mud hut and eat bugs for a living, don't give your life to the Lord, because that's exactly where He sends people who surrender fully to Him. Well, here's the thing. As I grew in my faith, I started to realize something about God. He's a good God. And he doesn't look to send us to do the thing we hate the most or send us to a place that's going to make us the most miserable. That really flows out of a very skewed view of who God is. And instead, my God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. He is a God who gives us the desires of our heart. And what I've come to realize is that if I lean into how God has wired me, I can understand where I best fit in serving him. And it's going to be a good fit. It's going to be doing something that I'm not saying we love everything about every day of our, ministry or our business or wherever we're serving. I mean, there's always a bad side to everything, but for the most part, we find ourselves in a place where we are serving out of an overflow of who God created us to be. And therein lies the key. This is why it's so important for us to look inward. I know there's kind of a pushback out there when we talk about self-discovery and self-assessment that, like, man, don't spend so much time focusing on you. Again, there's like this false humility around it of as if it's bad for us to look inward and say, who am I? And how has God wired me? How has God shaped me to serve him? Because we're like snowflakes, not in the modern sense of easily offended and triggered by everything, but there's not another person out there like you, Les. Like there's not
fingerprint.
Yeah. You've got this very unique fingerprint, snowflakeology. Anyway, you get what I'm saying with this, Les, right?
Yeah,
and
dude.
So we're at our best. We are truly most productive, having the most amount of impact and truly the most amount of joy in life when we are in that sweet spot of really being who God made us to be. So when we just run off down the road of I'm just going to serve God and it doesn't matter where I'm serving him or how I'm serving him or with who I'm serving him, we can kind of find ourselves in a place where we're that round peg in a square hole going, this doesn't feel like it's a good fit. I don't think I like this most of the time. And maybe because we should have spent a little time discovering a bit more about who we are and who God created us to be. So,
I'm thinking about the person that's hearing us have this conversation that may say, well, I hear you, but there are people that he calls to go in places like that and sell all their possessions here and move to those places and live in a mud hut and eat bugs. The interesting about that though, Jon, I know some of those people.
Me too.
And they love it.
Yep.
They love it. In fact, some of those people feel really sorry for me in my life, and I love my life. But some of them feel sorry that I've got to put up with what I put up with and do what I do. You said it. If we delight ourselves in the Lord, he will give us the desires of our heart. And it's just interesting how those two things sort of lock in together, and our desires even develop and may change some as we work out that calling and that purpose and our shape, as we say in the module. It just works out that way. And that's just the reality of it.
Les, I'm going to tell a quick story because I think we're just onto something here, and I'm going to share this. So my moment of surrender to really accept what I sensed as God's calling in my life to serve him in ministry came at this moment. I want to set it up for you. So here's the backstory. Our church years ago sent out one of our own couples as missionary family to Cambodia, and Mike and Michelle were their names. Mike was my kind of young adult Sunday school leader. So me and Jess were just married and we're kind of in this class with young people. And so I had a front row seat to watch someone go down this journey of just being a normal guy to becoming a missionary. And I'll never forget, watching him go through that whole process. He got married to Michelle, and here they are, this young couple. And next thing I know, they've gone through their deputation process. They've raised their financial support, and now we're sending them off to Cambodia. And so the big send-off day at our church, lots of happy tears, and it was a day of celebration. But inwardly, Les, I was basically saying to God, see, God, that's what you do to people who surrender and give their whole life to you. We're all acting happy, but poor Mike and Michelle have to go over to Cambodia now, raise their little kids away from home and grandpas and grandmas and all this. And that's what you do to people who really surrender to you. So God, that's why I'll give you most of my life, but not all of it, because if I give you all of it, you're going to make me do something I don't want to do. Okay, so fast forward a couple years later, Mike and Michelle have been on the field now for, a number of years in Cambodia. My parents had the opportunity to take a trip and visit a number of our missionaries over in Asia, including Mike and Michelle. When they came back, here was my day of surrender, Les. When they came back, They showed pictures in church that day of their trip and just, kind of gave an update on all the missionaries that they checked in on. And I noticed something when I was looking at Mike and Michelle and looking at their life. Are you ready for this, Les? You sitting down?
Yeah.
So Mike and Michelle were where God called them to be, and they were happy. They seemed in the pictures like they actually enjoyed what they were doing. Like you just said, they didn't seem miserable. They didn't seem like they were people in need of pity. And it was in that moment that God broke through to me and said, John, I wasn't punishing them by sending them there. I put them exactly where they need to be, and they're thriving in that place. And that was the day where I finally said, okay, God, if you want me in ministry, I'm going to trust you that you're not going to send me somewhere I don't want to go and make me do something I don't want to do. Because I had all kinds of fears about what that would look like if I said yes to God. There was some discomfort that came with that. But here's what I discovered in the process. The more I said yes to God and followed him into where he was leading, he put me in a place that I fit really well. I started to discover he had put some gifts inside of me that I didn't know fully were there. And so it's this self-discovery process where it's like, man, the more I really lean into that, I recognize that nobody wants me serving in that sweet spot more than the one who created me for it in the first place. And so maybe for some listening to this, they're like, John, why is that such an epiphany to you? But at the time it was. And I wonder, Les, I'm just going to ask you this question. You can speak to it. I wonder how many pastors are out there maybe serving God for the right reason in the wrong way, if that makes sense. Like maybe they felt like to serve God full time in ministry meant they had to work in and for a church. And because they didn't take the time to really discover how they were shaped, they just went into this very strict mold of what it meant to quote unquote serve God. And maybe God's inviting them to a journey that looks very unique to them and not this cookie cutter mold like everyone else they think is serving God looks like. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say this, the reason that this conversation is important for everyone is that you really should be able to do the thing that you enjoy. And I'm not saying enjoy it to the detriment of doing what God calls you to do. It's just that those things are not mutually exclusive at all. When he's equipped you in the way that he has, you have if we really believe in the sovereignty of God, if we're not just paying lip service to that, that means that, hey, what if God equipped you and me and gave us even the physical gifts, the spiritual, certainly the spiritual gifts, but even wired us in such a way to be the best person for the assignment that he gives to us. You know, John, most human beings, most bosses and employers are that smart.
Mm.
And God's much wiser and much more intelligent than we are. And you can assume rightly that a being of that much wisdom and that much sovereignty and that much knowledge and foreknowledge knows what he's doing when he creates someone. You know, he told Jeremiah that he knew him before he was formed in his mother's womb, that he knew his inmost parts, you know, and he does every single one of us. And the reason that this conversation is important is that there are a lot, I don't know the answer specifically to your question. Like I can't say who's in the right assignment and who's not, but what we can do is look at the evidence. And both anecdotally by the people that we know and the stories that we hear, and by the statistics, there are hundreds who leave what we would call a full-time gospel ministry of some sort, and not always in a healthy way, meaning they're not just saying, hey, God's released me from this assignment and opened up another door. That happens sometimes, but hundreds of times every month, it does not. And those are just the ones that we know about.
Yeah.
So it's just so critical that we somehow understand and line up with the way he's wired us so that we're just, I was going to say naturally, but even supernaturally using those gifts. John, anytime that I've taught even spiritual gifts at a local church level, it's like an epiphany when people understand do you mean that I enjoy serving other people because God actually placed that gift inside of me. You mean the reason that I can see a situation and speak wisdom in that is because God put that gift inside of me? Do you think you mean the reason I'm a generous person is not because my parents were? Maybe maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but it's because God gifted me in that way. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Man, that's so good. I'm glad you went to the statistical evidence because, and it's, I mean, depending on who you read, it's not even hundreds, less, it's thousands of pastors a year that are stepping away from ministry. And I agree, much of the time not healthy. And I think it's on some level, it's because of that, or that's a part of it. It's a complex issue for sure, but where you have people who thought that serving God looked like this one really kind of rigid model. And I'm coming back to my snowflake thing again. Maybe I'm going to title this episode "Snowflake Pastors." We'll see. But if it's true that God truly made us each individually unique, that, man, then it's possible that our pastoral journeys could look very different from one person to the other, and where there may be much more permission for us to really run in a lane that is our lane to run in, even though we don't see anybody else running in exactly that lane. That, what if that's actually okay? What if our calling is actually something very life-giving? And I would say that to any pastor listening to this. If you find yourself in a place where you're just constantly feeling drained and a lack of energy or a sense of dread around what you're doing, man, we got to look at that, because you're not in a healthy place. It's not good for you. It's not good for your family. It's not good for the people you're serving. And again, the goal of this, Les, is not, to be clear, it's not to get a bunch of pastors to go quit, leading their church or serving in ministry. But as we talk about an EntrePastor journey and a roadmap to financial freedom, we believe that the financial piece of that is probably not coming through the local church. It's probably coming from something outside the local church, where the ceiling is non-existent in terms of your income limitations or what is reasonable to be paid as a pastor. Like, I'm not here to tell a pastor they should get more money from their church. We're saying there's financial freedom possible. It's probably coming more from the marketplace. But that right there is where pastors start running into some of the mindset stuff we talked about last week. And what if it's possible that God's calling on our life could actually be life-giving and fun and enjoyable? And what if this other thing that we get to do, in addition to serving in the local church context, what if it was something that just flowed out of that abundance of who God created us to be? That's really what we're getting at in this assessment module, is helping a pastor discover what that is, and then feel that freedom and that permission to run in that path. So what do you think about this, Les, in the remaining minutes in our time together? What if we give just an overview of what is in that assessment module? We certainly won't give away all the good stuff. We don't have time to give it all away anyway, but what do you think about just giving a high level overview of some of the stuff we cover in that module?
I think that's a great idea. Let's do it. And also just keep in mind, if we're always looking for biblical models, that's just affirming. And I'm just so thankful, Jon, that we know what we do about the Apostle Paul. And I'd love to just be a fly on the wall and be able to watch him, even construct a tent, make a tent and sew everything together and get this. I just think that would be a real cool thing. The thing to remember is that he never evidently put that permanently aside when he began really in service to God's kingdom, because he went back to it at a time that it was needful in the situation, the context that he was in. He went back to that to help support himself during a time that would have been a pretty lean time, but he could continue to be faithful to his assignment because he had that skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, let me just run down a quick highlight of what we talk about in the assessment module in this pastor's roadmap to financial freedom. First of all, we start with a lesson on discovering your shape, and that's an acronym for your spiritual gifts, your heart, what you're passionate about, your abilities, your personality, and your experiences in multiple arenas of life, how all of that comes together to really help you see how God has shaped you uniquely for service in the world. And another thing that we get into in that module is, and man, I could really riff on this one, Les, I'm going to have to hold back from this, but it's, what do you want? It's a question that we bring pastors to. What do you want? And again, I think so often we think that's maybe a vain question to answer or somehow not spiritual to wrestle with that question of what do I want in life? But I believe that God puts desires in our heart. And then he says, if we delight ourselves in him, he will give us the desires of our heart. So,
John, Jesus asked people what they wanted.
yes, it's a
Sometimes
good
before
question.
he healed them. What do you want?
Yep. And so part of this assessment is helping you really answer that question. And where is it that you're wanting to go? And then the next part of that module is why. Like, what is your why behind it? And hopefully it's bigger than just, I want more money in the bank. That's an okay part of your why. But if that's the only part of your why, that's going to be rather empty. And so let's really get down to why you are here and what it is God has created you for. So we get into that. We talk about the who, like, who is it that I'm called to serve? Who is it that I really feel passionately about serving with these gifts that God has given to me? And, also am I surrounded by the right who as I'm going through this process and serving people down that road? And then we wrap this whole thing up with vision and talking about the importance of having a vision for your life and where you're going. So there's so much good stuff in this assessment module that I believe if a pastor takes the time to really slow down and get clarity on that, you're going to find yourself running in a path that it's probably like wearing a custom suit made just for you. One more quick story, Les, and then I'll give it to you. We'll wrap it up. I just recently was given my second set of turnout gear on the fire department that was custom tailored to my body, to my frame. There is a huge difference between putting on, I've never had a custom made suit. So this is the closest to a custom tailored suit I've ever had. It's the turnout gear. It's about a $2,500 piece of equipment that they give us. But I just got the second set in my life that's ever been custom measured to my frame. And I'm here to tell you there is a huge difference of walking around and working in a set of gear that is made specifically for you versus a set of gear that is, just generically size extra large that's made for one size fits everybody. Huge difference. And if you had to guess which one I would prefer to work in, what do you think's more comfortable, Les?
Oh man, the tailored all the way.
Tailored one. And what if God's desire for your life, Pastor, was for you to be working in a pathway that was custom built for you to where you're like, man, this feels great. Feels like it really fits me instead of feeling like a round peg in a square hole. Like, this feels like I'm trying to fight with some armor that isn't even mine to fight with, if we want to go biblical reference there.
You beat me to it.
David and Goliath. Were you going to go
stole
there?
My thunder. That's what I was going to go. I would say it in this way. You don't have to walk around in Saul's armor. And don't do it. Don't do it. Take that stuff off, lay it aside, pick up the sling and stones and that you've used before and go get it done.
So maybe we titled this one Pastors with Slingshots.
I like Snowflake Pastors.
All right,
I mean, you've sold me now. We just got to explain what a snowflake is.
Well, unfortunately, they're not going to get to that part until much later. Normally, we have the title before we hit record. Les and I decided, let's just riff on this for a while and see where it goes. So, but really good stuff, Les. I agree with something you said earlier, man. This is this pastor's roadmap to financial freedom that we've put out there has truly been probably one of the best pieces of content that we've created. And I know it's going to help a lot of people. So as we wrap up, why don't you share with our listeners how they can engage with this content and where do they go to get it?
Y'all, it's real easy. Just go to EntrePastor.com. Right there, front and center. You can look at the different ways to engage in that content. And it's, it can either be done very quickly or it's a long game. That's really up to you and where you are. But if you'll look on there, just hit the button that is closer to where your goals are, where you personally are, and it'll walk you step by step through how to do that.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastor's journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.